The numbers arrived quietly in 2020, buried in a Pew Research study that most outlets chose to ignore. White liberal women between 18 and 29 had the highest rate of diagnosed mental health conditions in the entire country. Not marginally higher. Astronomically higher. More than half, 56%, had received a clinical diagnosis for a mental health disorder. Their conservative counterparts? Just 28%. Same age bracket. Same gender. Same generation. Completely different psychological outcomes. Let that sink in for a moment. We're talking about women who grew up in the same cities, attended the same schools, breathed the same air. The only meaningful difference? Their political beliefs. The immediate response wasn't curiosity. It was defense. Think about what didn't happen. No major investigations. No widespread concern. No alarm bells ringing across media outlets about an epidemic of mental illness affecting young women at unprecedented rates. Instead, the rationalizations began immediately. Perhaps progressive women simply have better access to mental health care. Perhaps they're more willing to seek treatment, more emotionally intelligent, more self-aware. Perhaps conservative women are simply suppressing their struggles, trapped in denial by outdated gender expectations that prevent them from acknowledging their pain. The explanations multiplied rapidly because the straightforward interpretation was culturally forbidden. That something within progressive ideology itself correlates with psychological dysfunction at rates too significant to dismiss as statistical noise. This wasn't an isolated anomaly that researchers stumbled upon once and never saw again. Additional research confirmed the pattern across multiple metrics, using different methodologies, examining different populations. Liberal women consistently report diminished life satisfaction, elevated anxiety that interferes with daily functioning, increased depression rates that require clinical intervention, reduced overall happiness compared to their conservative peers. The correlation persists regardless of income level. It doesn't matter if she's struggling financially or earning six figures, regardless of education achievement. It doesn't matter if she dropped out of high school or earned a doctorate, regardless of life circumstances, relationship status, geographic location. Something about the intersection of female psychology and contemporary progressive frameworks produces outcomes directly opposite to what those frameworks promise. The ideology sells liberation but delivers anxiety, promises empowerment but produces helplessness, guarantees fulfillment but consistently correlates with its absence. Today we're examining why women who embrace progressive ideology struggle disproportionately with happiness and fulfillment, particularly in romantic relationships, but extending far beyond into every domain of life. This isn't political attack. Your beliefs are yours to hold. Nobody's asking you to change your voter registration or abandon causes you care about. But when specific ideological frameworks consistently correlate with measurable psychological harm, examining that connection becomes necessary. When certain worldviews reliably predict relationship failure and personal dissatisfaction, understanding the mechanism matters. Especially for men navigating relationships with women who've internalized these frameworks. You need to know what you're walking into. The pattern is undeniable to anyone willing to observe it without ideological blinders. The only question is whether we're permitted to explore what creates it. Whether we're allowed to ask why the people claiming to help women seem to be producing worse outcomes for women. Whether the frameworks that claim to serve women's interests might actually be serving something else entirely. The data is screaming at us. The question is whether anyone's willing to listen. Progressive frameworks train women to perceive oppression as omnipresent. Microaggressions hide in ordinary conversation. Systemic forces conspire against every achievement. Each interaction carries potential for violation across ever-expanding categories of harm. The world transforms into a minefield where injury awaits at every turn. This isn't metaphorical perception. It becomes experienced reality. When you're conditioned to detect offense, you detect offense constantly. Your brain gets rewired. It starts pattern matching for threats that may not exist. When you're trained to interpret ambiguous situations as threatening, threats materialize everywhere. The woman who's absorbed this interpretive framework doesn't experience the same reality as someone who hasn't. Her world genuinely is more hostile. Not because external conditions differ, but because her perception automatically converts neutral stimuli into negative experiences. Someone holds a door open? Benevolent sexism. A man doesn't hold the door? Disrespect. He offers to help with something heavy? Patronizing assumption of female weakness. He doesn't offer? Lack of consideration. Every scenario becomes evidence of the oppression she's been taught to see. Happiness requires fundamental baseline assumptions. That the world is navigable. That positive outcomes are achievable. That effort produces results. Grievance orientation systematically dismantles all three. The world isn't navigable, it's structurally rigged against you from birth. Positive outcomes aren't truly possible. Any success exists either despite systemic oppression or reveals complicity with it. Your promotion? You probably benefited from performative diversity initiatives. Your business succeeded? You're participating in exploitative capitalism. Effort doesn't produce proportionate reward. Outcomes depend on power structures beyond individual control. The woman who's internalized this framework struggles to experience joy because joy fundamentally conflicts with her required stance toward reality. If she's happy, perhaps she's not perceiving the oppression clearly enough. If she's satisfied, perhaps she's been pacified by systems designed to prevent recognition of her own subjugation. Happiness itself becomes evidence of insufficient awareness rather than appropriate response to genuinely positive circumstances. Think about how psychologically devastating this becomes. You can't win. Contentment means you're asleep. Dissatisfaction means the system is working as designed to harm you. Gratitude suffers most profoundly. Progressive frameworks emphasize what's owed rather than what's received. Focus orients perpetually toward deficits, injustices, failures of the world to provide what should be provided as basic entitlement. Gratitude requires recognizing what you've been given. But the ideology teaches that everything positive was either stolen from someone else or represents incomplete compensation for historical wrongs. Your comfortable life? Built on exploitation. Your education? Access others were denied. Your opportunities? Someone else's deprivation. The psychological toll accumulates relentlessly. Years of interpreting reality through grievance produce entirely predictable outcomes. Anxiety about constant threats lurking in every interaction. Depression about unchangeable systems that can never be reformed adequately. Anger at perpetual injustice that never resolves. These aren't bugs in the ideology. They're features. They're exactly what you get when you teach people this lens for viewing the world. The dating market reveals these consequences with brutal clarity. Liberal women want what women have always wanted. Biology doesn't update based on ideological commitments. Attraction to masculine men persists regardless of political beliefs. The desire for competent, confident, successful partners doesn't vanish because ideology labels such preferences problematic. Her body responds to what it responds to. No amount of theory changes that. But liberal women simultaneously demand ideological alignment. The man must share her politics. Must use precisely correct language. Must demonstrate understanding of systemic issues. Must function as ally to causes she considers essential. The list of required beliefs expands continuously as new categories of awareness emerge. He needs to understand intersectionality, acknowledge his privilege, recognize microaggressions, support reproductive rights, understand gender as spectrum, accept that masculinity itself might be toxic. The intersection of these requirements produces a vanishingly small population. Men who are genuinely masculine, successful, and confident, men who generate authentic attraction, are disproportionately not progressive. This isn't coincidence. The traits that produce male success in competitive environments correlate strongly with worldviews that progressive ideology explicitly rejects. Successful men tend to believe in individual merit. They've experienced direct correlation between effort and outcome. They're comfortable with hierarchy because they've climbed it. They're confident in their judgment because their judgment has been validated through results. The man she's attracted to typically holds beliefs she finds morally unacceptable. The men who hold acceptable beliefs typically lack the traits that generate attraction. The male feminist who's fully absorbed progressive frameworks has usually also absorbed frameworks that undermine masculine development. He's less competitive because competition is framed as toxic. Less assertive because assertiveness becomes domination. Less successful because success implies complicity with systems he's supposed to reject. He's been taught that traditional masculinity is problematic. So he spent years suppressing the very traits that create attraction. She's attracted to conservatives but requires progressives. The mathematics don't work. The solution to this equation involves either accepting men she's not attracted to, accepting men whose beliefs she rejects, or remaining perpetually single. The first produces sexless relationships maintained through obligation. She's with him because he checks ideological boxes, not because desire pulls her toward him. The bedroom becomes wasteland. The relationship becomes friendship with paperwork. The second produces constant conflict. Every conversation becomes battlefield. Every political development becomes relationship crisis. She's attracted to him but morally repulsed by his worldview. The third produces the extended singlehood that liberal women experience at dramatically elevated rates. Ideological rigidity compounds the problem exponentially. Politics has transformed from difference to deal breaker. Previous generations managed relationships across political divisions without treating disagreement as disqualification. Your grandfather voted Republican. Your grandmother voted Democrat. They argued at dinner and laughed about it after. Couples could vote differently without that difference threatening the relationship's foundation. Political beliefs were one dimension among many, weighted appropriately. Contemporary progressive frameworks make this impossible. Political beliefs aren't preferences, they're moral positions. Disagreement isn't difference of opinion, it's evidence of moral failure. The man who votes incorrectly isn't simply wrong. He's complicit in active harm. How can you build a life with someone complicit in harm? Many liberal women attempt to reshape their partners rather than selecting partners who already align. The attraction exists, so she proceeds with the relationship while planning to modify the objectionable elements. He's attractive, but his politics need work. She'll influence him. He'll evolve. She'll be the one who opens his eyes. The relationship becomes renovation project. She's dating his potential, not his reality. She's in love with the version of him that doesn't exist yet but surely will once he's properly educated. This rarely succeeds. Adult men with established worldviews don't undergo fundamental belief transformation because girlfriends wish they would. He's 32 years old. His beliefs didn't form last week. They've been developing for decades through experience, observation, reasoning. She thinks 3 months of her influence will override all that. The attempt to change him produces either resistance, conflict, and eventual relationship failure, or it produces superficial compliance. The first scenario looks like constant tension. She sends him articles he doesn't read, recommends documentaries he doesn't watch, corrects his language during conversations with friends, explains why his opinions are problematic. He pushes back. She escalates. The relationship becomes exhausting power struggle over whose reality is valid. The second scenario is more insidious. He says what she wants to hear while believing what he's always believed. He learns the script, mouths the correct positions when she's listening, votes however he wants in the privacy of the booth. She thinks she's reformed him. He's just managing her. Neither scenario produces genuine partnership. The woman attempting this mistakes her own priorities. She thinks the problem is his beliefs. The actual problem is the incompatibility she's trying to paper over. If his beliefs matter enough to require changing, they should have disqualified him initially. Proceeding despite them while planning modification establishes failure from the start. You don't buy a house you hate planning to remodel it into something tolerable. You find a house you actually want. The wiser approach involves selection rather than conversion. Finding someone already aligned rather than manufacturing alignment through coercion. But this requires accepting the population of men already aligned. Which often means accepting men who don't produce the attraction that men who aren't aligned produce. The dilemma reasserts itself. We're back to the fundamental problem. Some women do successfully influence partners, but this requires genuine connection, not ideological pressure. The man who shifts toward his partner's views does so because he values her perspective, because the relationship creates organic space for growth, because influence flows naturally through affection and respect, not because she's testing and demanding and threatening consequences for insufficient compliance. Real influence is quiet. It happens through living together, experiencing things together, seeing the world through each other's eyes over time. It's not enforced through relationship ultimatums. She doesn't hand him reading lists. She shares her experiences. She doesn't quiz him on proper terminology. She lives her values and he observes them in action. If he respects her, he might naturally shift toward some of her positions. Emphasis on might. But the woman trying to forcibly convert her partner isn't operating from this place. She's operating from the belief that his current state is morally unacceptable and must be corrected. That's not influence. That's control. And men smell it immediately. Liberal women invest heavily in education and career development. These are valuable pursuits producing genuine benefits. Independence, achievement, capability. The criticism isn't that they pursue these things. The criticism is the simultaneous neglect of equally important investments. Relational skills atrophy while professional skills develop. The woman who spends her 20s optimizing for career advancement might simultaneously be de-optimizing for relationship success. She's getting promotions, earning raises, building impressive resume. Meanwhile, she's learning absolutely nothing about how to build partnership with a man. The traits that produce professional achievement, competitiveness, assertiveness, prioritization of self, aren't the same traits that produce relational success. Sometimes they're directly contradictory. The boardroom rewards behavior that the bedroom punishes. Being combative gets you ahead at work. It destroys intimacy at home. Refusing to yield establishes authority with subordinates. It creates contempt in romantic partnership. Prioritizing your agenda above all else makes you effective executive. It makes you impossible partner. The accomplished 35-year-old woman with advanced degrees and impressive career might also be someone who hasn't developed capacity for yielding, nurturing, cooperative behaviors that long-term partnership requires. She's optimized for a game that doesn't transfer to the game she now wants to play. She spent 15 years getting really good at chess. Now she wants to play poker. The skills don't translate. Meanwhile, men who would make excellent partners often selected earlier. While she was building career, he was building family with someone who prioritized differently. He met a woman at 26 who actually wanted what he wanted when he wanted it. They built together while our career woman was building alone. The population of available men has fundamentally shifted by the time she's ready to prioritize relationship. The best candidates have been claimed by women who were playing the relationship game while she was playing the career game. What's left in her dating pool at 35? Men with baggage. Men with commitment issues. Men who aren't desirable enough to have been selected earlier. Men who themselves deprioritized relationship for career. The progressive framework actively discourages early relationship prioritization. Career first. Independence first. Don't settle. Don't compromise ambition for relationship. Find yourself before you find a partner. You don't need a man. Focus on becoming complete on your own. These messages make sense within the ideology. They also produce outcomes that women who follow them often deeply regret when the advice's limitations become clear. She followed all the rules, got the education, built the career, established independence. Now she's professionally successful and romantically isolated. The framework promised she could have everything, just not all at once. Focus on career now, relationship later. What it didn't mention is that the relationship market operates on different timeline than the career market. Your career will wait for you. Your fertility won't. The quality men seeking partners won't. Companies will hire a talented 40-year-old. Quality men generally won't start families with one. She traded her highest value years for achievements that don't translate to the domain she now cares about most. Certain behaviors correlate with progressive ideology and actively repel potential partners. Constant correction of language. Lectures about problematic content. Inability to enjoy anything without political analysis. These behaviors make the woman exhausting to be around, even if her underlying beliefs are ones a man might share. He tells a joke. She explains why it's not funny, it's actually reinforcing harmful stereotypes. He recommends a movie. She delivers 10-minute analysis of its problematic representation of gender dynamics. He can't relax around her. Every sentence is potential minefield. The demand for emotional labor without reciprocal provision creates asymmetry that men recognize as fundamentally unfair. She expects him to process her feelings endlessly, validate her experiences, acknowledge her struggles, provide emotional support without limit. She expects accommodation to her needs without equivalent accommodation to his. When he needs something, it gets filtered through whether that need is valid or just male entitlement. When she needs something, it's automatically legitimate. The progressive framework she's absorbed positions her needs as sacred while his needs become suspect. Evidence of entitlement or fragility. He's tired and wants quiet evening. That's emotional unavailability. She's tired and needs him to listen to her process her day for 90 minutes. That's reasonable expectation of partnership. Testing behavior emerges directly from the ideology. She's been taught to evaluate men for red flags, to watch for signs of unacceptable belief, to probe for hidden problems that might not be initially apparent. Every man is potential threat until proven otherwise. The dating process becomes interrogation rather than exploration. What's your position on reproductive rights? How do you feel about gender wage gap? Have you examined your privilege? What do you think about cultural appropriation? These aren't conversations. They're ideological purity tests. Connection becomes impossible when one party is investigator and the other is suspect. He's not a human being she's getting to know. He's a collection of positions she's evaluating for correctness. The men who tolerate this behavior are often men who lack options. Men with alternatives don't endure treatment that men without alternatives accept. A man with choices walks away from the interrogation. A man without choices endures it because he's desperate for any relationship. The selection pressure produces a population of partners who are themselves unhappy, creating relationships doomed from the start because both parties represent failure of better options. The victim mentality removes agency and therefore happiness. Progressive ideology positions women as victims of systems beyond their control. This framing has political utility. It identifies injustices worth addressing, but it carries severe psychological cost. The woman who believes she's victimized by forces she can't affect experiences learned helplessness. Her outcomes don't depend on her actions. They depend on systems she cannot change. Agency is prerequisite for happiness. The sense that your choices matter. That effort produces results. That you can influence your circumstances. This produces well-being that victim framing systematically undermines. If your outcomes are determined by patriarchy or white supremacy or capitalism or any other structure beyond individual control, individual effort seems pointless. Why try when the game is rigged? This manifests in relationships as passive-aggressive behavior. Direct action requires agency she's been taught she doesn't possess. Progressive ideology trains constant comparison against ideals that cannot be achieved. The perfect relationship. The perfect man. The perfect equality. Real relationships, real men, real dynamics fall short of theoretical perfection. They always will. Perfection doesn't exist. The woman comparing her actual partner to theoretical ideal finds her actual partner lacking. Always. He does the dishes without being asked. But he didn't also wipe down the counters, so the mental load still falls on her. He plans a date. But he didn't consider whether the restaurant sources locally, so he's not really thinking about impact. He listens to her problems. But he tries to solve them instead of just validating her feelings, so he fundamentally doesn't understand emotional support. The comparison isn't between two realistic options. It's between reality and fantasy. Reality loses every time. The relationship that could have provided genuine satisfaction gets rejected for failing to match something that never existed. She had a good man. Not a perfect man because that doesn't exist, but a good man who loved her and tried. And she left him because he didn't match the relationship she'd constructed in her head. Social media compounds this through curated highlight reels. Other couples seem perfect. Other relationships seem conflict-free. Other men seem to have fully absorbed every correct belief while still being masculine and successful and attractive. She sees the photo of her friend's boyfriend at the Women's March holding a sign. Doesn't see him emotionally checked out at home. She sees the post about anniversary trip to Europe. Doesn't see the credit card debt funding it. She sees the engagement announcement from the guy who quotes bell hooks. Doesn't see him struggling with depression and unemployment. The comparison shifts from theoretical ideal to curated presentations of other people's relationships. Equally impossible to match, but appearing more attainable. If Sarah found a man like that, why can't I? Because the man Sarah found isn't actually like that. You're comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. Gratitude becomes impossible when comparison is constant. What you have is always less than what you could theoretically have. The man who's present is always less than the man who doesn't exist but seems like he should. He remembered your birthday. But that other woman's boyfriend planned elaborate surprise party. He supports your career. But that other woman's husband retired early to be stay-at-home dad while she pursued her dreams. The relationship you're in is always worse than the relationship you're imagining. Satisfaction requires presence with what is. Comparison removes presence and deposits attention on what isn't. You cannot be grateful for what you have while fixating on what you don't. The self-reflection gap produces repeated failure. Liberal frameworks typically locate problems externally. When relationships fail, the failure is attributed to his flaws, to patriarchal conditioning, to toxic masculinity, to systems that produce deficient men. The woman's own contribution to the failure goes unexamined because the framework doesn't prompt that examination. Without accurate self-assessment, learning is impossible. She repeats the same patterns because she doesn't recognize them as patterns she's generating. The ideological testing, the impossible standards, the victim positioning, the demand for change without self-change. All of it continues relationship to relationship because the framework she's using prevents recognition of her role. The marriage statistics tell an undeniable story. Liberal women marry later than conservative women. They divorce more frequently. They report lower marital satisfaction. These aren't isolated findings. They're consistent patterns across multiple studies using different methodologies. Something about progressive belief systems correlates with measurably worse relationship outcomes. The causation likely runs in multiple directions. The beliefs might cause the outcomes. The outcomes might cause the beliefs. Both might result from underlying factors that produce both. But the correlation is consistent enough that anyone pattern matching for relationship success should take serious note. Men looking for long-term partnership rationally discount women who've absorbed frameworks associated with relationship dysfunction. Not as moral judgment, as risk assessment. If liberal women divorce at higher rates, a man selecting for stable long-term partnership reasonably factors this into his evaluation. The ideology becomes one data point among many. You don't ignore relevant predictive information because it's politically uncomfortable. This creates feedback loop. Liberal women are avoided by men prioritizing relationship stability. The remaining men are those not prioritizing stability or those without options to prioritize anything. The selection produces worse outcomes, which produces more data showing liberal women have worse outcomes, which produces more avoidance. The cycle reinforces itself. For women willing to examine this, your frameworks might not be serving you. The beliefs you've absorbed might be producing the opposite of what you want. Check whether consistent unhappiness might indicate something wrong with the approach rather than something wrong with everything outside the approach. If every relationship fails, maybe the problem isn't that all men are deficient. Maybe the problem is your selection criteria or your behavior within relationships. The traits that produce attraction in men often correlate with beliefs you find unacceptable. You can either accept this and expand your tolerance for difference, or you can accept singlehood. The men who fully satisfy both your attraction and your ideology probably don't exist in numbers sufficient to provide options. You're filtering for a population that's statistically negligible. then wondering why you can't find anyone. Consider that you might contribute to your relationship failures, not as self-blame but as accurate observation. The patterns in your history might reveal something about your behavior rather than revealing only deficiencies in every partner you've had. If the last 5 men all had the same problem, maybe that wasn't coincidence. Maybe you're selecting for that problem, or creating it through your behavior. The common factor in all your failed relationships is you. Constant grievance is incompatible with well-being. The attention you direct toward injustice is attention not directed toward what's good in your life. You can be aware of problems without making problems the center of your psychological existence. Permission to enjoy your life doesn't make you complicit in systems you oppose. Being happy doesn't mean you're ignoring suffering. It means you're capable of experiencing joy alongside awareness. For men navigating this landscape, ideological rigidity reveals itself early. The tests begin immediately if they're going to begin. The correction of your language, the probing of your beliefs, the evaluation of your politics. These behaviors predict what the relationship would contain. What you experience in dating is the best version of what you'd experience in partnership. It gets worse, not better. She's on her best behavior now. This is her trying to make good impression. And she's still exhausting. Exit early when the patterns appear. The woman who can't enjoy a date without political analysis won't enjoy a life without political analysis. If you found this valuable, subscribe for more analysis on relationship dynamics, dating market realities, and the ideological frameworks shaping modern partnerships.